Hello, I'm MG and welcome to the 7th video of MLOps video series. Thank you so much for watching all the videos so far, and I'm hoping that they were all informative for you. So in previous videos we have started to create our CI or continuous integration pipeline, and in this video we are going to see how we can continue the creation of that pipeline and started to interact with my Azure machine learning within the training stage. So training the model, testing the model, doing all these steps without interactively going all the way to my Azure machine learning studio, being all the time just in Azure DevOps, and use the agent that we have selected to execute my CI pipeline. Alright, welcome back to the MLOps video series. This is MG, and in the previous video we already started to create our CI pipeline, and then we saw that we created Azure ML if just in case not there. We created our compute cluster, we uploaded the data, and now that's the time that we can start to train the model using that compute we created in my Azure machine learning service. So the question is, well, first I should create a kind of dumping area, kind of directory that I can put that trained model that we're going to create there, to then grab that model to deploy it in a staging production environment. So let's create a temporary folder in my agent that is running this compute, and for doing so I can use bash. So how we can do it? Well, we did it before, the same thing. I click on add, let's type bash, we choose it from here, and let's actually name it different to make sure we can distinguish and understand what is the task doing. I have the name already here, so I just copy that and paste it here. So I'm going to make a directory for my model and also the metadata that I need it, because when I register and deploy the model, I want to actually register the metadata at the same time. So I want to put both of them in this directory, which is a kind of dumping area or temporary place in my agent that I am executing this pipeline. So nothing so fancy. And how we can create it? Well, simply I can have it as an inline code, and the code again, just make it fast. I paste it here, and this is making directory with the same name and the models, and I'm done. So I will start to train the model, the interesting part. And how we can do it? Again, do I have to come here and go to the notebooks, and I have my training code, where is that? It's here, and run it? No, again, DevOps is not a human. So what we'll do, we'll actually do it through a CLI, and we have the CLI already being added to my DevOps. So what we can do, we just type Azure CLI, and I think now you're more comfortable that why we need that CLI to integrate to our Azure Machine Learning as a code, to automate this process. This is the main thing in Azure, in MLOps. Let's rename it. What you would like to rename it? Well, training the model. I know this is the step you were all waiting for, that training model. And what we're gonna do, again, we need to connect using that service connection we created before. Let's GitHub shell, and now this time we are going to have a inline code. And let me paste the code, and we will see what this code is doing. All right, awesome. So again, I'm using the Azure ML extension. We installed that already, and we submit. We're going to submit a script using that extension or AZ CLI extension. Inside this resource group, we define that in variables before you remember that. Inside this workspace name, and this is the experiment name. We need to define that in the variables. What is experiment name? Well, let's get back to Azure Machine Learning to show you here. Remember when I came to experiment here, and I show you that you can specify your use cases through an experiment to isolate them. Experiment called insurance, and I know that whenever I'm doing anything with the insurance prediction or claiming a file in insurance prediction use case, I call it a kind of insurance experiment. So we need to create that and then execute everything under the umbrella of that experiment. So if my other teammates are working in a separate use cases, they can have their own experiment and we can have a good way of tracking all of them separately to define them as an experiment. Well, the name is pretty clear that it's an experiment. So we define this shortly in the variable. The cluster name, this is the cluster that I need to use to execute that script. And we already have defined that in variable because we created on the top. That's why we created first, and then we are going to train the model. And the Kunda dependencies, where is that? It's coming from my repo. Let me show you again. My nice data science or developers, they have already added the Kunda requirements here. So I do not need to be worried about. And even if you are using the Azure ML, you can still use Azure ML that automatically create an environment for you. Within a code, you can register it and you can use it in DevOps. Okay, let's back to my pipeline. Again, I'm opening so many tabs and hard to track all. Okay, finally. And then after passing all those requirement and dependencies files, and this is the place that I am actually running that train AML.py. Just quickly see what is that code. Train ML. Okay, so it's registering the data, and this is the main part that's gonna run. So what is it doing? It is creating that kind of model pickle within the name we're giving. We create a run. That's a kind of way that we can log what we are doing when we're training the model. We are logging some of the metrics of the model. We train the model, test the model, and then we again store the results and the logs of those metrics after validating the model. So this is basically what this train.py, the Azure Machine Learning.py is doing. Let's get back to the repo. Okay, so that's all about that line of code, and we need to have a working directory to let this code run because the path is not relative. So we need to come to working directory, and where's the path? The training folder, because train ML is here. All right, we are good to go to the next step. Oh, before that, don't forget, we need to add some variables. So let's go to variable. What is the first thing? Experiment name. So I'm gonna add it here. Experiment name. And what do you want to call it? Well, that's an insurance, and we are going to do a classification. So that's gonna be a good name for it. The next thing is the model name. Remember, we had it as a variable. We have to choose a name for the model. We're gonna add model name and insurance model. We're gonna add it here. All right, I think these are the two variables we need to add. But before, again, let's save it. It's gonna save the pipeline and all the variables. And what's the next step? So let's say we have trained the model. We need to register it because that's the place we need to register first and then deploy it. So let's get back to see what is registering. In Azure ML, if I go to models, this is the list of the models that I'm going to register and be shown here. I don't have anything, so it's gonna be here soon. And from here, I can choose that registered model, click on deploy and deploy it. But again, Azure DevOps is not a human and it cannot interactively do all these steps. So we need to first register the model using CLI as a code, and then deploy the model. But before deploying, we need to define which place. Let's say production, we're gonna deploy or somewhere else. So first, let's say first we're gonna register the model. Okay, let's get back to my pipeline and create a new task. Again, you can guess, right? You're getting expert Azure CLI. Another way to interact with my Azure ML. Click on add. And let's rename it to registering model. Oh, sorry. And then the same thing, the same service connection. And here, again, I want to have it as a kind of shell code and inline because I want to paste the code here. What is the code? This one is a little bit long, but don't worry. I'm gonna explain. Okay, let's see what is this code doing. So it is again using Azure ML extension for CLI. registering the model, that's a command tool. And then inside the resource group workspace, the model name, we define the variable. And and this is the place that we're gonna define, put the output of that trained model inside, the pickle file inside this path. And this is actually the path we defined when we were making this directory. That's a temporary area. We're gonna put the registered model there to grab it, to use it for, let's say, further for deployment. And the description for that trained model tag, we're gonna tag it that the data is insurance, the model type is classification, and the framework scikit-learn, and put the metadata as a model.json in that temporary place, because we want to grab those information from that directory we are defining in my agent to deploy. And that's it. So let's go to the next. And what would be the next? Well, downloading the registered model and the metadata to the agent to deploy it later. Again, what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna click on Azure CLI, click on add. Let's rename it as downloading model. All right. And again, the same thing, you have seen that a lot. Service connection, the script type shell, and the script location. I'm gonna choose it again in line, and I have the code. I just gonna copy that and paste it here. So this is again downloading the model from that resource group, from that workspace name inside that directory you defined. The same thing with the metadata. And if they're already there, override it, because this pipeline gonna be continuously executed when there's a new version of the code, so that models and stuff gonna be overridden here. So again, that's just a dumping area, a kind of temporary environment. And I think we are good to go. We're gonna go with the next step. So what we're gonna do now, we have all these artifacts downloaded as a kind of outcome of this pipeline, but we need to copy these outcome, the models, to that temporary folder to use that to deploy it later. So what I'm gonna do, the last task would be copy the files, right? So I just type copy, click on add, and that's all added here. And let's say, yeah, the name would be okay. But what I'm gonna do, I wanna change that source folder to my build pipeline source directory. This is the source, and whatever is inside metadata folder, models folder, deployment, test integration, and package requirement. These are the stuff that I have, some of them in the temp area, and some of them I have inside my repo, right? Because I need this information when I want to deploy my model, the package requirement that I have in the repo, I need to copy them in my temporary area to use that to deploy them later. So whatever I need for deploying the model by itself, deployment configuration, those tests, we're gonna do some testing, and the package requirement, I need that to copy them. And where I want to copy that to my build artifact staging directory. I'm gonna explain that here more, but for now, I think we are good. So let's go to the next part, which is publishing my artifact. That's the last step for my CI pipeline. So let's search publish artifact. Yeah, so I'm gonna publish this artifact to let my release pipeline use it to deploy the model. I click on add. Let's go here. And the directory path, let me copy that from here. So this is what we are copying, publishing what we just copied to. That was the sync of my copy activity. And the artifact name, let's call it landing. This is the kind of temp environment. That's a landing zone for me. And that's it. Okay, so let's save the pipeline. Congratulations, we are done with our CI pipeline. I'm hoping it's gonna work. I click on save, and actually I can save and well, I just wanted to queue from here, but that's fine. I can run the pipeline from here as well. and let's click on run. Okay, again, it's gonna take a while as we did before, so I'm gonna pause recording and I want to resume recording again as soon as the steps are done to save your time. All right, our pipeline is almost done, and the good news is all steps were successfully executed. And as you can see, again, installing Python requirements, passing unit tests, publishing the test result. We already saw that we installed the CLI ML extension in my agent in Azure DevOps. We created a compute cluster. We saw that there is a new cluster with this name already being there. We uploaded the data, and we saw that we uploaded the data. And then we trained the model. We trained the model, registered the model, and downloaded the model, and copying that to that temporary file and called landing. That's a kind of temporary folder that we're going to push those models created, downloaded, and copying that there to grab it from there to deploy in my environment that I'm going to choose in my release pipeline. Awesome. So let's see what is happening after executing all this pipeline. So if I get back to my pipeline, and this is the pipeline, the agent ran. Let me get back to the pipelines. So here, clicking on pipeline, and this is the CI pipeline we just executed, and all the steps worked successfully. I click on it. This is the last run, and if I click on again, here, as you can see, if I go to test, again, it is showing me all those kind of unit tests that we passed. And if I get back to summary, here is the place I want to show you, published. And this is the folder that we created, and we said that we're gonna dump and download that train model and metadata here, and also copy the rest of the things we need from repo. Let's say the package requirement, everything to the landing zone. This is the place I will grab all this information to deploy and release in my continuous deployment or CD pipeline. So I just wanted to show you that what we did as a task in our CI pipeline is already being created here. So let's see what happened to our Azure Machine Learning. We trained the model, registered the model, we did all this process using code. We didn't come and manually do it. We didn't. So let's see if they were all successful. Remember, we didn't have any model in our Azure Machine Learning Studio because that was the first time you're training. Let's do a refresh now. I go home and do a model again. Awesome. There's a new model that has been created here and registered. Remember the experiment name we chose, insurance classification, it's already added here. And if I go to experiment, yeah, you can see that there's an experiment with the name we chose in our DevOps pipeline and being created by a service principal. This is my DevOps. So MG didn't manually do it. So that's my DevOps doing that. And this is, you see the date and the time, you can see, so on and so forth. So the model is being created here. And now I have a model to deploy it. How? If I click on this model, I click on deploy. Remember, I showed you can define the environment that you're going to deploy the model. But again, DevOps is not a human. We need to have a CLI command line tool and code to deploy this model to an environment that we need to do, let's say Kubernetes or a container. Also talking about container, I'm going to show you something actually very cool. So let me get back to my Azure portal. I don't need this cloud shell anymore, or maybe we need to. Let me open a new tab and let's go to the resource group we created using our infrastructure as a code pipeline. And let me do a quick refresh. All right, so as you can see, we have container registry that is hosting the environment images that we need to use to deploy the model, but we don't have any deployment environment that can run our model in staging or production. We don't have any Kubernetes here, and we don't have any Azure container instance to actually put the model there and let it work and test or deploy the model and have it work in production. So that's what we're gonna see in the next video series. And when we have our continuous deployment pipeline, which is a release pipeline in DevOps that will use those components we created in our repo to deploy them in the environment that we're going to define. So we have all we need and we are just ready to start creating our deployment pipeline. So thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned. In the next video, we're gonna create our CD pipeline. Thank you. Wasn't that fantastic? You just created a CI pipeline that automatically starts to train, test, and all the steps that you do as a data scientist now in a pipeline, and we were able to actually execute all the pipeline and see the final results. That's amazing. And now you have the artifacts. You're ready to deploy the model. But shall we go to the production? No. Remember, we are going to apply DevOps principles in machine learning. So before going to the production, let's test the model in staging and then move it to production, which is going to be the continuous deployment part, or CD pipeline, that we're going to create. So if you want to know how, and if you want to learn more for the steps that I just talked about them, stay tuned, and we're gonna see all of those for the next videos, and we'll start with the 8th video shortly.